Welcome to the Software Journey podcast, a show where remarkable tech professionals and entrepreneurs talk about how they got into tech, first customers, trends, finding talent, hiring IT services vendors, work-life balance, and so much more. I'm your host, Konstantin Klyagin, founder of REDWERK, a software development agency helping businesses worldwide reach new heights with digital transformation and win more consumers with robust, award-winning solutions. Tune in for real stories and actionable tips in the space of SaaS, Web3, DeFi, and game dev. It's gonna be fun. Let's go! So, could you please introduce yourself, John?
Sure, happy to. So, John Rogers, I've been in the IT industry now, I guess, for about 35 years. And most of my time I've spent managing IT departments or being a consultant to IT operations. I started my career with Anderson Consulting, which so I was 6 years there. I then went to work for two major law firms in London. I worked for Allen & Overy and Herbert Smith, two of the major law firms in London. Had another period of time working for myself as a consultant, and then I joined Punter Southall, where I've been for the past 13 years, and where I will be for another 2 weeks until I leave.
All right, so you're about to make a big move. So,
I am.
How did you get into the tech industry, and what inspired you back then?
I got into the tech industry completely by accident. So when I left university, I applied for a job in IT with a computer company called ICL, which no longer exists. It was a competitor to IBM at the time. And I then went away on a very long journey. I then went away with a friend, and we traveled across Europe into Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. And then I got a letter saying that the company had gone bankrupt. So I needed to come back straight away. So I actually ended up starting off as a programmer with another company. Didn't like programming, went to business school to get an MBA, knowing that I never wanted to work in IT again. And guess what? That's where I spent the last 35 years. So I don't know if it's an inspiration or an accident, or it's I fell into it. But I've always been on the business side of IT. I've always managed IT rather than being a technical expert. So when people come to me and say, my laptop doesn't work, can you fix it? My usual answer is, well, no, but I know a guy who can.
All right. And what was the first programming language? You said that you briefly worked as a programmer.
I did. I worked in COBOL, and I also programmed one of the very early Apple computers.
COBOL was recently quite a sought after technology with the Problem 2000.
Oh, I know. And COBOL programmers could charge whatever they liked for programming around that time. They had a very happy time. Of course, as soon as the year 2000 actually came, they were all out of work because people realized they didn't have to upgrade half these programs in any case.
All right. So you worked as a group IT director at Punter Southall for almost 14 years.
Yeah.
What were your responsibilities, and what is expected from you as an IT director in general?
So yes, you're right. I joined as an IT director, and when I joined, I found that the systems were in a complete mess, that the team was demoralized. I actually found that all of the systems were being managed indirectly from somebody based in Russia that nobody had ever met, who had global admin rights over all our systems. So that was an interesting challenge. So the first thing to reorganize was to reorganize it, to bring it under control, to recruit a new team, to sort out all the licensing and basically get it back on an even keel. And then to move all of our systems to an external data center. And over that time, it's interesting because when I started, all of our systems were in a computer room in the office, then moved to an external data center. And actually within a month, we're going to be shutting down the data center entirely and moving entirely to cloud-based systems. So
All
you
right,
can
and
see
how come the main person in charge was in Russia? How did it happen?
I
Back
don't
then,
know.
there was probably no remote work whatsoever.
I don't know, but it was set up by my predecessor, who I think had some interesting ideas about how to manage IT systems. So
Or a
I've
KGB spy.
so I have no idea how they met. I have no idea why he decided this would be a good idea, but it was cheap. It was cheap, so that was the one good thing about it.
All right, so capitalism.
Yeah.
All right, and what was the most challenging decision that you had to make in your career as an IT director?
I think there were a number, but challenging decision was, I think, to shut down all of our systems and move externally, to move to cloud-based systems. That's the one that comes to mind. But over the course of time that I was there, the company went through huge changes because it was like a holding company, or is like a holding company. So they actually closed down a lot of businesses. They sold businesses, then they bought new businesses. So there was constant change, unlike a lot of companies that are pretty much steady state. At Punter Southall, it was always changing.
All right. So were there any concerns regarding data security when moving from self-hosted to the cloud?
No, because we've done it gradually. It wasn't like we decided one day we were going to do it all. So it's taken about 2 or 3 years. We've thought really carefully about all the security issues, and we've taken the Microsoft approach to security. Microsoft seemed to have really come good and to got some very good products. So we use that as a layer around our systems.
All right. So was Azure already around back then?
It's mostly Azure. We're using all third parties that use their own, wherever they store their data, wherever they have their systems, but we have strict controls about where data can be held. We are very careful about which suppliers we take on and doing due diligence on them.
All right. So you pick the cloud providers with a certain protocol in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think with all these things, you have to take. I mean, there's always an element of risk, but it has to be calculated risk, and you have to think carefully about what you're prepared to accept. So with our providers, I'm comfortable that they're all well run, well managed. We do conduct proper due diligence on them. Whenever we take a new supplier on, we torment them with a really long, complicated questionnaire, which they have to fill in, which I'm sure you have come across as well.
Of course. Of course. So what is a clear sign that an IT department needs a transformation?
That an IT department needs transformation. I think if they're not meeting the requirements of the business, and I've always been really keen to, first of all, figure out what does the business need, what is the business strategy, what do people within the business need, and then work from there rather than starting by talking about technology.
And you said that when you joined the company, there was a demoralized IT team. How can you re-energize a demoralized IT team?
I think you've got to give them, well, there's two answers to that. One is that you've got to give them a clear sense of purpose. So they need a plan, they need a strategy, they need a plan. They need to know that there is money available to do the projects that need to be done. I think they need to know that there's a solid basis. And then within the team, the one thing you need to do is to work out who are the people who are going to succeed and who are the people you need to let go. And my philosophy has always been, as far as possible, keep people, retrain them, give them a sense of direction. But sometimes you just have to accept that people are not right for the job and they need to leave and they need to go somewhere else. And then I've always built a management team that I can trust and rely on. And if you can find people within the business, that's great. If you can't, then you need to recruit them.
All right. And you can also probably raise them to be a part of the management team as well.
Well, and I mean, I know this is a bit of a cliche, but I always look to recruit people smarter than I am. or at least better at doing what they do than I am. So I recruited a really good CTO who is extremely strong on security and operations and areas like that. I recruited a project manager who's great at scheduling and program of projects, and somebody to look after all the service aspects. So that's what I do. I don't pretend that I'm better than them. My skill is in coordinating them and managing them to achieve a particular objective.
And what barriers are there to organizational change management?
Oh goodness, that's the biggest problem of all, isn't it? I mean, that's the real challenge. I think, well, it depends which organization you're talking about. Within the IT team, I think it's the things I said. You know, you need to figure out what can you change, who are the people that you can influence, who are the people you want to keep and the people you don't want to keep. But I think actually there's another challenge within the business, which is that you've got, in my case, a number of business units. All of them thought that their IT support was pretty terrible. And so the key to that is to listen to what they have to say and then be realistic about what you can provide. So then promise that customer service is going to be transformed tomorrow, but actually listen to what they have to say and say, if you've got any particular really big problems, I will take those away and I'll fix them. You know, because you can't transform in a weekend. It takes time. But what you can do is demonstrate that you care about people and what they want.
All right, yeah. Provided there is no toxic atmosphere already in place in the team, then you need to take harsher steps to reorganize it.
And you know, when I took over, there were one or two people who were just not prepared to change. Yeah, so that does happen.
Yeah, constantly nagging and saying that everything is done the wrong way.
Well, and you know that it was really unfair. I wanted to change their job because they were doing a really good job, except they weren't. So, but yeah, that happens.
So speaking of IT infrastructure, what are the absolute essentials your IT infrastructure should have in place to ensure business continuity during times of uncertainty?
Security. Above all else, you need security. Because if you don't have that, then everything else is compromised. So in terms of infrastructure, there are all kinds of things you need. Start by making sure that nobody can disrupt it, that these systems are secure, make sure that the controls are in place. And then think about the people side of it as well, that you need people to run systems. And so think about the competency of the people you've got. I've always worked in medium-sized organizations, so I've never had the luxury of teams of people doing things. You know, it comes down to a small number of individuals, so I have to be able to trust them. I have to rely on them. So if the system fails at 10 o'clock at night, I have to rely on the fact that they will then work on it until it's fixed, so that next morning it'll be working again. And you can
everything has to be fail-safe and stable in the first place.
Well, you know, as far as possible, but ultimately you still have to rely on people. And during the time of Punter Southall, I've seen some really strange failures which you could never have predicted. So you cannot 100%. We had a whole disk system which failed. And it failed because there was a flaw within the Unix code that managed the disks. I mean, it was so obscure, you could never have predicted it. It's just that when it happened, it had to be fixed, and it was fixed within, I think, 12 hours overnight. But that's the kind of extreme circumstance that is just going to happen sometimes.
Did you make sure there were backups?
Oh, well, there were backups, absolutely. I mean, yes, we do. We take routine backups, we take archive copies, we have a regime. But in this case, it was a physical failure of the hard drives.
All right, so it wasn't lack of quality assurance or anything that could have been prevented.
You know, you can prevent a lot of things, but you can't prevent everything. So you have to expect the unexpected. So in terms of infrastructure, you plan as much as you can. You put as many controls in place. You have alternative systems. Sometimes all of these things go wrong.
Let's talk about domains. Like you've worked a lot with legal and accounting firms throughout your career. What are the pros and cons of working in these domains?
I don't know why I tormented myself by doing that, because they are some of the worst people to work with. Lawyers are really difficult people. They're very demanding, and they can be very unreasonable. So lawyers are tough. Accountants, not so bad. And I've also worked with actuaries who are generally fine. They're okay. But the thing about professional services is that they all think they're smarter than you are. So they all think they know better than you. So that can be quite challenging. So they can be quite arrogant people. But also they are very intelligent. So they're also quite satisfying to work with in a way, because they're not smart, they're not stupid people at all.
And in your opinion, what industries or niches lag in digital transformation the most, and why does this happen?
Which industries lack it?
No, which industries lag in it? So
which
industries? Yeah. Which industries are behind?
In my experience, and I can't tell you everything, but in my experience, it's those industries where they are people intensive and they're processing a lot of information. So the example I give you is pension administration. Everybody has, certainly in the UK, everybody has a pension. So it's really important to manage all these pensions for people. And the pension companies that do it are incredibly inefficient because it's all done by people. You might think that you could use AI. You might think that you could use process improvement. There's all kinds of things you might use. But these companies just have armies of people sitting at desks, writing letters and reading emails all day.
Well, this is probably until they all retire, and then they get replaced with with computers. Because come on, it's a pension company; they have to care about their employees,
You'd think
that
so.
they can finish their career and get a nice pension.
So I mean, you look at all the technology in the world and you think, why don't they adopt that? And I don't know the answer to it, but that's a good example of where companies are really not taking advantage of automation.
So what is your take on outsourcing IT services? Have you ever partnered with software development agencies to alleviate the stress of your internal team?
Yes, I've used third-party software companies. And the important thing is to be really clear what you want. Is to have very clear specifications, but yes, that can work well. So I've worked with internal development teams, external development teams. I think it's whatever works best for what you need. And I do outsource to an external company for a lot of our help desk, for example, help desk services. But you just got to choose very carefully and find the right company to do that with.
And where were those companies located?
Well, I might say they're located in Ukraine, but
well, not necessarily. The outsourcing world is so much bigger than that.
I think, I think they're all over the world, of course. But I think in practical terms, I would not want to go outside Europe. And that's just because it's important to be able to visit people, to go and talk to people, not just to do everything by email and video. Because I think culturally, it's quite difficult to work with companies in India, for example. So it's just easier to work with companies that might be located in Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Poland, countries like that.
Is there a tech talent shortage in the UK? If yes, how do you tackle it? And what are the best ways to retain talent?
I think there is a shortage, but I haven't personally experienced it. In my team, we have people who've worked in the team for a very long time. The average period of time that people have worked in my team is 10 years, which is unusual for an IT operation. People more usually will move around after 3, 4, 5 years. But what I have is an extremely good team. They're loyal. They like working together. And so what you build up is a team spirit, which is very hard to reproduce.
And this is how you retain them. But did you have to hire massively sometimes? Like if you need to staff a team with, let's say, 20 additional developers, that may be a challenge.
It would be a challenge, but my team is not that big. So the biggest it ever got to was about 35 people in total. So we're a mid-sized company, we're not a big company. So you have to tailor the team to the size of the organization.
All right. Yeah. Well, if you are growing slowly and evolving like organically, then it's of course easier to hire people.
Yeah.
Without a rush.
I think so. Yeah. And we didn't have that challenge. We didn't have to suddenly recruit large numbers of people.
Mm-hmm. All right. So next question. You've been in IT since the 90s and watched the industry evolve over all these years.
Yep.
What is the biggest difference in how IT teams function now compared to 20 years ago? Are there still things and issues that remain the same?
Most issues remain the same from my point of view. Yes. I always used to say that in IT, there are fashions. That over time, there are fashions that people talk about different technologies as if it's something they've suddenly discovered. So, for example, when I very first came into IT, there was something called bureau computing, which is where you used somebody else's computers to do some of your processing. And then there was client server and the rise of your data centers where you brought all the data back in-house. And now we've gone full circle, but we now call it the cloud instead of bureau computing. So, I don't think the fundamentals change very much. The technologies are totally different, obviously, from what they were in the 90s. But in terms of the actual challenges of managing and supporting systems, I don't think they're so very different.
All right. And talking about your career, what inspired you to leave Punter Southall and start your own consultancy agency at this moment in your life?
I want to do something different. I've been there for 13 years. I just feel I've done everything I can. I never thought I would be there that long because everything else I've done has been 6 years. 6 years at Anderson, 6 years at Herbert Smith, 6 years at After 6 years, I'm bored and I need to move on. So actually, it was double the length at Punter Southall just because it kept changing. But it's now become a much smaller business. It's I think there's not much challenge, and I found myself last year bored. So what I actually did is I went to my boss and I said, I need to devise an exit strategy. I need to leave. But what I'll do is I'll make sure that there's a succession plan, that we reorganize the team, but you've then got what you need to support the business in the future. And that's what I've done. So I'm actually very proud of the fact that what I leave behind is going to be something that's robust and will continue to work.
Right.
But in terms of what I do next, I just want some more challenges. I really do. I just want to do different things, look at different problems, work in different ways. Plus, I want some time off. So I think that's not an unreasonable combination.
Gives you more flexibility and freedom for sure.
Yeah.
All right. And in your new business, who are your clients and what kind of businesses can benefit from your services?
So I think my clients are going to be medium-sized companies, anything between 500 and 2,000, something like that. So there'll be small businesses. There will be businesses that need advice on how to build and develop IT support. What I found is that a lot of IT managers are really good at the technology, but they're not actually very good at the commercial side of running an IT operation. So I think what I'm likely to do is to come in and do fairly short bursts of consultancy where I take a IT operation and actually reorganize it, restructure it, look at the commercial side, look at the suppliers they're using, look at their contracts, and actually work out a better way of operating and then leave them and go somewhere else.
All right. Do you consider keeping Punter Southall as your customer? Like
Maybe,
getting them as a customer?
possibly.
Because that's quite a typical scenario when someone
Yeah,
like
yeah, and I think
leaves.
there's a couple of opportunities there, but you know, if they work out, that's great. But I don't depend on it either, because you know, if I were them, would I use me? Yeah, I think I would. I think I would. There's one project in particular, but let's see if it works out.
All right. And do you intend to work with companies only within the UK or internationally?
Anywhere is fine.
And so what channels do you as a consultancy use to find new clients?
I don't know yet. I think probably through contacts I've built up over the last 12 years. I know people who work in consulting. I know consulting firms. I know people in other businesses. So I think that's most likely. Possibly also through third-party agencies. But I think, you know, that's going to be part of the fun. That's going to be part of the what I need to explore over the next 6, 9, 12 months. So part of this is I'm deliberately cutting myself off. I'll take a little time to myself, and then I'll go and find all this out.
So yeah, leveraging your network. That's
Yeah.
That's a good way to get new customers. And how are you going to build your clients? What engagement models are common in the UK?
I think the most common one is simply to set up your own company. So I'll create my own company, which is easy to do. And then the company can bill the clients direct. I'll simply invoice them, which is the way I've worked in the past.
Yeah. Invoicing is understood, but there are engagement models like fixed quotes, like subscription, like time and materials when you bill by the hour, something like that. What is the most common?
I think the most common is bill by time, bill by number of days. Yeah.
So the tech sector develops at a breakneck speed. What do you do to keep up with the times and remain relevant?
Oh, what do? I read newspapers. I go to conferences sometimes, but the problem with conferences is that a lot of the time they're more advertising. I don't know if you've ever been to a Microsoft conference, for example. You know, sometimes you pick up really useful information and ideas, but sometimes it's just promoting themselves.
For me, tech fairs are mostly for networking, for getting new leads, and recently I've been getting booths to just generate some income, incoming leads and potential clients.
Yeah. So I think the kind of proposition I have is not so reliant on being completely up to date with technology. Because the consulting I will do will be to say, okay, let's look at your suppliers. Let's look at how you're spending money. Let's look at what you're trying to achieve. And let's put together a plan that puts those together. So, you know, whether somebody is using hosted systems or on-premise, whether they're using Azure or AWS, you know, what technologies they're using is kind of secondary importance. It's actually more important. And I think what I can bring is to say, okay, all this technology is interesting, but how are you going to deploy it? How are you going to manage it? How are you going to pay for it?
So basically, you're going to be starting with auditing the existing IT infrastructure.
That's what I've done in the past, and it works. Yeah, and it doesn't take very long. It's maybe just 2, 3, 4 weeks. Because actually, while you're looking at the infrastructure and how the business works, you're also talking to the people in the team. So you are actually achieving 2 things at once, because you can also figure out who are the good people in the team and what they know, what they're capable of doing.
All right, and then you come up with a strategy, and then you oversee it over time.
Yeah, maybe I oversee it. Maybe I then pass it back to somebody. You know, it's going to depend on the circumstances. So one piece of work I did quite a long time ago now was to look at the overall structure, look at the whole operation, and then to recruit my successor. So that was about a 3 or 4 month assignment. So it wasn't actually very long. But then you recruit somebody to do it. So it depends what the company wants. It's entirely down to what does the client want.
All right, all right. So you said, and we already know that you are not a very like strictly tech person. You're more into people and money. But what's one tech trend that excites you?
I think, and this doesn't sound very dramatic, but I think mobile computing. And within my business, we had a strategy in 2019 to move everybody to laptops and make them completely mobile and put all the infrastructure in place so that all the offices would be Wi-Fi only, so that people could essentially just walk into an office, open the laptop and work. They could go home and do the same thing. And we completed that project about 3 months before the pandemic.
Yeah, this was my question. Like, do you need an office in 2023?
You need a place to meet, but you don't need an office. And actually, one interesting thing was that in our main office, which is in central London, the business occupied 2.5 floors. So after the pandemic, they had an opportunity to reduce it because the lease came up for renewal. So they thought they were being very smart and they reduced the office to 1.5 floors. Actually, it wasn't reduced enough. They could have reduced it to half a floor. Because you just need a place where you can meet clients, where you can meet each other from time to time, because face-to-face contact is important. But in the office now, there are rows and rows of desks, which hardly ever get used.
Yeah, meeting in person, this is the luxury that we don't have recently, because with the pandemic, we became remote first, and with the war, we don't have offices anymore. So we only meet online, and we actually for the past year, it's been working really well. Like we're meeting online, and we are working from different locations. But
so
it turns out. It turns out the office is my staff is mostly in Ukraine. So my team is in Ukraine. Some people left for abroad, but the majority are in Ukraine, and we keep hiring in Ukraine because we consider that important.
So these people are working from home, or they're working in temporary offices. Is that right?
In co-working spaces, but mostly from home, because that's probably the most convenient place. And then whenever there is an air alarm, they can go to a bomb shelter and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, that sounds familiar. My entire team actually is the same. So when the pandemic started, I sent them all home, and they never went back.
Exactly. This is what we tried to do. Once the pandemic was over, or it was less strict with all the rules, we started trying getting people back to the office, but only maybe 10 people would show up in each of our 2 locations, and we couldn't manage to get past that. And then with the war, we just shut down our offices and let everyone work from wherever they can.
Yeah. That makes sense.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
To my younger self? What, apart from not working in IT, you mean?
Something IT related, if possible.
For all I joke about it, actually, it's been very good to work in IT. It's worked well for me. I have a business degree, so I look at the world differently from most IT people, and I think that's a good combination. I can understand, it's like I speak 2 languages. I speak business language and I speak IT language, and I can translate between the 2.
All right. But the advice still, what would it be?
Advice to my younger self. I don't think I've got different advice. I can't think of anything that I regret. So I guess when you ask that question, you think, well, should I have done something differently, or should I have been better educated, or should I have lived somewhere else? My only regret is that I never lived and worked outside the UK. I always thought I would. I always thought I would go and live somewhere really interesting and different. I never did.
All right. Well, there is always a chance to change that.
There's a chance to change that, isn't there? And I certainly travel a lot. So, It's not like I don't go to other countries.
Yeah, but living somewhere else is a different experience.
Yes.
Yeah, like I lived in 3 different foreign countries. This is the third one. I lived in Romania, I lived in Germany for 12 years, then I went back to Ukraine, and now I live in Portugal. It's fun. Also, lets you get some into a new culture, then learn a new language. If you're persistent enough, meet new people who may think differently than you do. And that's fun.
Yeah, no, so that's what I thought I would do, but different circumstances. I got married, I had a family. You have to earn money. You have to pay the mortgage. So all these things get in the way.
Those things ground people for sure. All right. And speaking of communication, what's the best way of communicating within the organization, according to you?
Within the organization,
Yeah. Except for personal meetings that you already mentioned that are
well,
important.
if you'd asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said getting everyone together in a room. But now I think the answer is getting everyone together on video. Since the pandemic, I think I've got the whole team together maybe once, maybe twice. It's just too complicated. It's too difficult. Because my team now, I mean, it's far more of an issue for you, I appreciate, but even for me, I've got people who live all over the country. So for them all to come together is a big exercise, and a lot of the time it's just not worth it. But that's because we know each other. We already know each other, so it's easy to do that.
But if you have a newcomer, how do you introduce them to all the processes and practices that you already have in place in the team?
That's much more difficult. It is much more difficult. And we actually recruited one person who he was recruited before the pandemic, but didn't join until it had started. And he never really became a member of the team in the same way. It's not that anyone, we liked him and he liked us and we worked well together, but he was the only person who then left. I think it's just that you never quite make those human connections the same way.
All right. Any instructions, any written playbooks, anything?
Yeah,
that would
all
help
of those things. All of those things. And video calls every day. So plenty of opportunities to interact. Maybe it was the individual, but I think it's something human that you can never quite make the same connections remotely as if you're actually in the same room.
Or in the same bar, at least once.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Do you have any hobbies outside of work that help become a better leader?
I don't know if they help me become a better leader. I love cycling. I do. I've cycled in a lot of different countries. So I've cycled in South Africa, in Morocco, in Spain, as well as in this country. So I don't know if it makes me a better leader, but it's certainly a good opportunity to completely relax. If you're trying to cycle up a really steep hill, you're not going to be thinking about work.
That's a kind of meditation, right? And also, getting away from all the thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's important to do it. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you enjoy it, just to get away from everything.
All right. Here in Portugal, we do surfing and kite surfing.
Yeah. Well, you've got the Atlantic there, haven't you? So I guess that's quite convenient.
Yeah, it's a bit cold in the water, but then if you have a good wetsuit.
Is that what you do? Is that how you like to relax?
Well, I just recently started doing that. I mean, I've been kite surfing and surfing for many years, but I didn't do that often. And here there is an opportunity to do it on a daily basis. And I'm just trying to, to integrate it into my routine, weekly routine.
Yeah.
Also, hiking is a nice thing to do. When you're surrounded by nature and the ocean and the mountains, then and forests, you can just go hiking.
Yeah, there you go. And then you get away from looking at a little screen all day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's becoming more and more Not difficult, but how do I say?
Yeah, it's just harder to leave these things behind.
Yeah, right. So, how do you recharge after an eventful day?
How do I recharge? Oh, well, usually it's going to be sitting down with my partner and having dinner together and watching a little TV. That doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But after an eventful day, that's what I would do. In the summer, when it's really light, I'll go for a ride, or I'll go for a long walk. When there's a really long day. We're just starting to get there, I think, now.
Well, back in Kiev, I used to jet ski and motorboat. I have both of those toys still there in my garage.
Yeah.
At some point, I gotta bring them to Lisbon.
It might be a little tricky at the moment to do that.
It is because you have to figure out all the customs stuff. Maybe it's easier to buy here. We'll see. So, some political questions, if you don't mind. What were your first thoughts when you discovered that Russia invaded Ukraine?
I didn't predict it. I like to think I'm quite smart, and I do like politics and history. I was completely taken by surprise. I thought it was all just for show. So what were my thoughts? I mean, like most people, I was outraged that in this point in history, that one country just invades another. And people talk about the fact that it's the first. I don't think it's relevant that it's Europe. Anywhere in the world, I think it's equally wrong that one country would invade another. And since then, I've actually got quite closely involved. I mean, I spend a lot of time reading the news. I have 2 people from Ukraine living with me. My partner has, because we don't live together. My partner has 2 people from Kyiv living with her. I just think it's just something I can do, because I look at the situation. I think there's nothing I can do. Sure, I can give a little money to charities that might help, but actually this was something practical.
So you signed up for Homes for Ukraine?
Yeah.
I know there is a program. I was in London in December last year for London Blockchain Week, and there are some Ukrainians, and many people told me they are hosting refugees. That is a nice thing of them to do.
Well, it is a nice thing to do, but it's, like I say, it's the only practical thing I could think of to do. I think the difficulty now is that, the initial interest, the initial enthusiasm is starting to fade. So I don't think that there's much opportunity for Ukrainians to come to the UK now, but there certainly were a lot that came in the first few months of the war.
Well, Europe is still accepting a lot of refugees, and actually many of those who left went back.
And I can see that. I mean, it's, each individual has to make their decision, don't they? They obviously all want to go home, but they have to balance that against the risk. For some people, they may not even have homes anymore if they've been in the East and the homes have been destroyed or taken over. So I guess it depends. The 2 people staying with me are from Odessa. So it's not on the front line, but they're still getting missile attacks quite regularly. So I wouldn't want to live there, given the choice.
I'm from Kharkiv. I brought my parents to Berlin. They're in Germany now.
Were you there at the beginning of the war, or were you in Germany at the beginning of the war?
I wasn't on an airplane in the beginning of the war.
Oh, that's right. You told me, yeah. But before that, where were you living at the time?
I was living in Kiev. Yeah, for the past 5 years, and I had no plans to immigrate again. I just had to.
Yeah. The thing I find, certainly with the refugees that I've spoken to, how do I put this? They don't like talking about the war. They like talking about how things used to be. So they will talk a lot about Ukrainian traditions and holidays and food and where they came from, all those things. But I think psychologically it's quite difficult to talk about the war itself because it's so uncertain as to how it will turn out. So
It's either the past or the future. If you're optimistic enough, you can be talking about what you're gonna do after the war is over.
yeah, and I don't know whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic, but I'm certainly hopeful because there has to be a time when Russia is thrown out of Ukraine. I just don't know when it will be.
Speaking of predictions, by the way, have you watched Years and Years, the series, the UK series?
No?
They a few years ago, I think it came out 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe even 5, and they predicted Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Believe it or
Really?
not, yes.
Okay.
And huge like refugee camps in the UK for Ukrainian refugees.
Well, that was a very bold prediction. So, like I say, smarter than me, I didn't think there was going to be an invasion, even in the weeks leading up to it. Looking back, maybe I should have done, but
Me neither. Me neither. I was just planning my return to Ukraine. I was like, okay, I was being precautious. I was like, okay, maybe I have to think about the ways to leave fast if something happens. But then I was absolutely sure that it was probably just muscle flexing.
yeah,
And
yeah, it was unbelievable. I mean, it's as far as I see it, it's one. It's hard to say he's mad because I don't think Putin is mad. I just think he's utterly obsessed with his idea about a greater Russia and about the idea of reclaiming all the lands that Russia ever used to dominate.
but I'm wondering if any world leader would be able to think about something like that during his first or second term in the office. Maybe those terms have to be limited worldwide, because otherwise they build such a confidence and such a I don't know, stubbornness that they think they can do everything or anything.
Well, the terms were limited, and then Putin changed it,
Exactly.
so it was limited to 2 terms. But then he became prime minister, and then he went back to being president again.
And
I
then
don't
they
think,
changed the constitution.
yeah, I don't think anyone thinks he's going to give it up voluntarily. So
No,
you know,
no way.
either he
No way.
dies of natural causes or somebody kills him. But I don't see any other way that he's going to let go of that power. Imagine how intoxicating it must be to have that much power. I mean, it just must corrupt your soul to think that you can do whatever you want to do.
There are some studies that show there are like structural, anatomical almost changes in your brain when you have power or unlimited power or like a lot of power for long enough.
Yeah, well, there are enough bad leaders in the world, so he's not the only one. He's just by far the most destructive one at the moment.
All right. So, what's one book you recommend our audience should read and why?
Oh, well, since we've been on this theme, I think there's a book called How Democracies Die. Have you read that one?
No, unfortunately, I haven't.
I can't remember the author, but it's about how countries start being democratic, and over time they become more and more authoritarian until eventually some of them turn into dictatorships. So an example of that is Hungary. It went from communism to democracy. They had a really good, reasonably free democratic system. And then over time, Orban just subverted the whole thing until now it's a sort of quasi-democracy. It's not really a democracy anymore. Or you could take the example of Germany in the 1930s. Hitler came to power because people voted for him. And then once he had power, then he took apart the whole democratic apparatus, so it turned into a dictatorship.
Yeah,
What this book,
in Germany, the principle now is that the democracy shouldn't be able to destroy itself.
well, and that's easier said than done. I mean, look what Donald Trump did in America. You know, the Americans always prided themselves on having a constitution, about having all these checks and balances, and then along comes somebody determined to destroy it. And you see how much damage he did in one term, and if he had been re-elected, I think he would have completely destroyed all of the foundation of the democracy in America.
But there, the system worked out and didn't let him.
It did work out, yeah, but it's a near thing, and there's nothing to say he won't run again, and he might win again. I personally think it's unlikely, but you know, you can't discount the possibility.
All right. Thanks for the book recommendation. And to finish, the last question is, what's your life motto?
Oh, I don't know if I have a life motto, but if I was going to create one, it would be, you know, life is short. I had at the end of 2021, I had a serious accident. I came off my bike. I smashed my hip. I was in intensive care for a week. I was in hospital for 2 weeks, and then I spent I was in a wheelchair for 3 months. And that actually has quite a profound effect on you. You know, when something that bad happens to you, you sit back and think, life is short. You know, so that was part of the reason why I decided I was going to leave my job, find something else, and actually, you know, challenge myself rather than just doing something that was easy and paid the bills.
All right. Did you also think that motorbikes are dangerous?
Well, it wasn't a motorbike. It was a bicycle.
A bicycle.
It was a bicycle. Yeah. Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I don't know, because I suffer from amnesia. I had amnesia, so I can remember nothing about this. All I know is that I was cycling along a perfectly flat road. The conditions were good. I remember leaving home in the morning, and the next thing I knew was waking up in hospital. So I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know if anyone else was involved. I don't know if it was an animal that got in the way. I don't know. Which is kind of hard, because if I knew what had happened, it would be easier to explain it. All I know is that I hit the ground really hard, shattered my pelvis, various other injuries. I was very lucky to have really good surgeon, really good doctors, really good care. So now I'm 90% back to normal, but it makes you stop and think. And I've talked to other people, and I think if something that bad happens to you, actually in some ways it can be quite good, because it makes you sit back and think about, what is it I really want to do.
All right. Well, happy to hear that that you feel better now and you're almost back to normal.
Yeah, almost. Well, I'm going cycling in Portugal, so you know, I must have.
Well, be careful here.
I know.
Be careful, but you'll be in a large group, right? So
I'll be in a group, and I'll probably be the one.
Safe.
I'll be the one at the back going slowly.
It's not about winning, right? It's about
no, it's not a race. It really isn't a race. It's about the experience. You're right. It's been nice talking.
You'll enjoy it. There are nice landscapes and nice weather and nature and everything.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be really great experience. So it's just going to be hard work. Yeah.
All right, John. Well, thank you for the conversation. I wish you best of luck with your consultancy business and speedy recovery from your accident. I mean, the remaining 10%, and also have fun in Portugal cycling.
Well, I will do, and good luck to you. I mean, I think, you know, and I do hope, you know, that the war turns out and that Ukraine does emerge from this, because it's, you know, it must be a terrible experience. Even if you're living in Portugal, you must think about it all the time, about your friends and relations and people who are in Ukraine. So I really hope that works out, and that war comes to an end before too long.
Yeah, we hope so too. Like we've been also doing our best to support our country. Like we've been hiring in Ukraine, and I personally spent 200 grand on volunteers and helping the military and everything last year. And we are not going to stop there until the invaders leave our land.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Very nice talking to you.
All right. Nice talking to you, John.